Oh, hello. My name is Ross Kelly, and I used to be a mussel farmer in Argyll in Scotland. Then something happened that changed my life completely, and I think by the time I've told you about it, it should have a similar effect on yours. I certainly hope so, anyway. In 1996, a sequence of events occurred that was hidden by the Vatican, British intelligence, American intelligence, and other institutions who had been on the trail of that sequence of events for a long time. It all started when something happened in the Portuguese village of Fatima in the year 1917. First of all, there was a loud sonic boom heard by a lot of people. After that, there followed a sequence of solar activity that was witnessed by 70,000 people. It was a very strange thing that they saw. It appeared to them that the sun danced around the sky, moving from place to place instead of staying in its normal slow movement sequence. Some of the witnesses said that they saw the sun appear to shoot down to the horizon and back up into the center of the sky again. By normal physics, it would seem to be an impossibility that people could witness such a thing, and yet they all swore that it had happened. What they actually saw was not the physical movement of the sun or the earth. It was actually a replay of time shown to them by the intelligence that lies behind the shining of the sun. I know that because in the early months of 1996, I had a direct solar link experience myself. I'll be telling you about that experience in a minute. But first, I'll get back to Fatima. When the Fatima event happened, 3 children belonging to the Marco family, they were illiterate shepherds, and they were out in the fields by themselves. The oldest of the 3 children, the cousin of the other 2, who were brother and sister, was the first to notice, according to Vatican reports, the sun appearing in an unusual manner. It was Lucia, the cousin of the Marco brother and sister, who first noticed that the sun was appearing in a different way from usual. She called to her cousins and told them, "Look at the sun, look at the sun." When they did, they met the same intelligence that I met in 1996. And what they experienced was a feminine quality of extraordinary beauty. The sun didn't appear to be yellow like it normally does, and there was no glare around it. What the children saw was a blue disk of light extending into infinity, and on looking into it, they connected to the intelligence that is the thing that operates our lives. It's actually the intelligence that gives us our own thought, our Creator, the feminine god, Anna. Now, I learnt that Anna was her name, or is her name, after having my solar link in 1996. The children in Fatima reported to other people in the town the fact that they had met a beautiful woman at the time of their solar experience, which the Vatican later claimed was the Virgin Mary. When the children met that beautiful woman, they received instructions directly from her, telling them to return to the same place a month later and to bring writing materials with them, even though they were totally illiterate. When the second meeting took place, the Marco boy, Francesco, was used to do something that illiterate people can't normally do. What he did was that he produced a copy of a letter written in the handwriting of an English child, in English. Later, when the Vatican investigated the Fatima episode, they had the children taken into custody by the civil authorities, the police, and the police used threat of violence while interrogating the children. They wanted to make sure that they got all of the facts about all of the things that had happened to the children into the open. Not the general public's open, but to the Vatican. When the Vatican discovered the production of the letter, they knew that something very real and something very important had occurred there, but they didn't know why. The letter itself did not contain an explanation for its production, and it worried the Vatican because they knew that God had done it, but they had no idea what the purpose of the letter was. I now know that in between the years of 1917 and 1996, British intelligence were told the truth about what had happened in Fatima. After the Fatima events, the Vatican claimed that the Virgin Mary had given the children messages to be delivered to the Pope, and they also said that the Virgin Mary had told the children that they would soon be going to heaven, meaning they would be dying soon. Within 2 years of those events, the Marto brother and sister were dead, and the cousin, Lucia, was put in a convent where she spent the rest of her life, and she actually lived until last year when she died. During her time in the convent, she had no direct communication with the outside world unless she was accompanied by people who were controlling the PR on the event, Vatican people. So the real secret of Fatima was hidden at that time, and it turned out that the reason for the production of the letter didn't actually materialize until the year 1996. The reason that the Vatican told British intelligence is because they had reasoned that the letter that the Fatima child had written actually belonged to somebody, because the writing in the letter was consistently the same all the way through. And the boy in Fatima, of course, had no handwriting of his own. Now, it wasn't until June 1996 that British intelligence actually found out, or at least got their first major clue about the identity of the real boy who wrote the real original letter. The Fatima version was a copy of it. Now, in 1996, after I had had my solar link experience in Scotland, I compiled a document called the Letter of the Law, which was a 7-page letter, a typed letter, that contained an account of my experience and my understandings that had been given by the occurrence of the experience. The way in which British intelligence obtained my letter was by intercepting a letter that I sent to Camilla Parker Bowles, with which I included a note asking Camilla Parker Bowles to pass the letter on to her friend Prince Charles. I did this because I thought that valuable information in the hands of somebody who already had a public platform would be more useful than it would be in my own hands. It turned out, however, that God had another reason for the sending of that letter. I didn't know it, but 2 months before I posted that letter from Oban in Scotland, British intelligence had witnessed a startling thing in a mental hospital in London. In April 1996, a female mental patient, a middle-aged lady, who did not know what she was doing most of the time, and certainly had no idea what she was doing when she did this, reproduced a precise replica of the letter that the boy in Fatima had written, enlarged on the wall of her room. It nearly filled the entire end wall of her little room in the Gordon Hospital. Among the people who were brought in by the startled doctors who saw what the woman had done were people working for British intelligence, and of course when they arrived and saw it, they knew precisely what it was because they already had the Fatima copy. At that point, they still didn't know precisely why the writing on the wall had occurred. It wasn't to be until October 1996 that they found out the full importance of that piece of writing. After sending the letter to Camilla Parker Bowles, my wife and family and myself went to the Canary Islands for an extended holiday. We didn't actually know whether we were going to go back to Scotland at that time, because quite a number of startlingly wonderful things had started happening to us after I had experienced my direct solar link to Anna. In May 1996, my wife Elaine was given an equally enlightening experience that let her know that God is real. This, to me, was a wonderful thing, because for 16 years we had been together, and during that time I had been unable to communicate my thoughts about the nature of reality. So to see Elaine receive enlightenment in the visual way that I saw it happen to her, I actually saw her eyes light up like the sun, only not quite in the same brilliant violet blue way that I had met that intelligence, but in a much deeper violet blue. It was like watching the eyes of a goddess looking out of Elaine's face, and it started in her eyes, but after that her face shone with the same light, and I knew that God was introducing herself to Elaine. So prior to the production of the letter that got sent to Camilla Parker Bowles, both Elaine and I knew that something extraordinary was happening to us. So before we went to the Canary Islands, Elaine had had an experience that had brought her totally with me in connection with the things that had been happening. One of the things that we began to notice at that time was that there seemed to be a strange link between the things that were happening to us and the number 7. We noticed, for instance, that each of our birth dates added up to 7. My age was 43, which adds up to 7. Elaine, in 1996, which also adds up to 7, was 34, and the month in which we had discovered the 7th link was the 7th month, July. When we received our passports prior to going to the Canary Islands, we discovered that each of our passport numbers added up to 7, and we noticed that our telephone number also added up to 7. That's the complete national telephone number that we had. So we had seen this, but thought at first that it was, as people do, coincidence. But later we were to discover that it was being shown to us as a clue that was to lead us into a knowledge that eventually led us to the thing that I'm going to demonstrate later in this film, the thing that is the real Da Vinci Code. Now, towards the end of July, on a Sunday, we left Keeper's Cottage and we started on our journey to the Canary Islands. On that journey to the Canary Islands, a very blatant sequence of events occurring that involved the number 7 happened. They happened in such a way that it was absolutely impossible to miss the fact that they were happening by design. And what it showed us was that the timing of our journey had been planned in order to provide the sequence of 7 links that happened all the way to the Canary Islands. And when we got to the Canary Islands, we discovered that the Canary Islands themselves are locally known as the 7 Islands. So, by the time we had arrived there, we had learned a bit about synchronicity and about the fact that God was organising our journey as a kind of teaching program. During the 3 months that we spent in the Canary Islands, the number 11 also became a very significant part of that synchronicity. After the initial sequence of 7 had occurred that had woken us up to the existence of synchronicity, a sequence of synchronistic occurrences involving the number 11 happened just as blatantly as those in which the number 7 had been brought to our attention. During our time in the Canary Islands, we also started to realise that the synchronicity, which is a way that God communicates with people, is not just shown to you in numbers, but in all the things that are around you in your daily life. And we started to comprehend the fact that it is possible to be educated by taking note of the signs that exist around us. On the 13th of October 1996, Elaine and I, after leaving the children in the Canary Islands with friends, took that flight to Dublin. The flight left Tenerife at 7 o'clock in the morning and arrived in Dublin at 11 a.m. When we bought the tickets and the travel agent told us the timing of the flight, we knew that it was a sign to let us know that we were taking the right path. Now, I'm going to cut the whole story short for this introduction because I want to get on to demonstrating my proof about everything that I'm going to tell you, and I don't want to have you sitting there a long, long time, so I'll keep it to the basics. The reason why the letter in Fatima was produced was to provide a kind of identity link to me that could only have been produced by God, because I wasn't born until the year 1952, and yet the letter had been written in my handwriting in the year 1917. In the year 1963, in Billericay in Essex, in England, I was the child who actually wrote the original letter. It happened one day after school, after I had had a very, very intense experience of love that was triggered by a sighting of a girl in a corridor in that school. Now, that girl was just used to trigger an experience that let me know the real meaning of divine love, and as the 11-year-old boy that I was, I found it almost too overwhelming to bear. It was too big an experience for a child of that age to take and be able to deal with. So my way of dealing with it was to go home after saying nothing about it to anybody, because I knew nobody would understand what I was talking about. I wrote the girl a love letter later that day. Now, that love letter was never delivered to the girl, because at the time that I had seen her, she was having a meeting with the school headmaster, and her parents told the headmaster that the family was emigrating. So I knew that I wasn't going to be able to send a letter to the girl, even if I had wanted to. I know that no other living person ever saw my copy of the letter, and in the end I actually disposed of that letter in such a way that it probably still remains where I put it then, now. In October 1996, I was taken by British intelligence to see the writing in London that the mental hospital patient had produced on her wall. This happened to me about 1 week after I got used by God to do a very extraordinarily important thing. When Elaine and I had left the Canary Islands on our way back to Scotland, we paid a visit to a guest house in Dublin that we had been to once before. It turned out that that guest house was a little bit more than just an ordinary guest house. It was actually the place in Dublin where the IRA held their meetings in secret. Something happened in that guest house that enabled Elaine and I to know that the building was being bugged by British intelligence in order to listen to the IRA meetings, and that the IRA had no idea that British intelligence knew their meeting place. The details of how we found that out and everything else that happened in that guest house and in the entire sequence of events that occurred in 1996 are included in the first part of Little Book Big Secret, so I'm not going to go into all of it now. What I want to do is to explain the purpose of our visit to that guest house. On the second night in that guest house, I was used to deliver a spontaneous message directly to British intelligence at a time when they were already looking for me in connection with the fact that they knew that I was the writer of the original Fatima letter. MI6 received the message by means of their own bugging devices that they were using to spy on the IRA. And the message that I was used to give in the middle of the night was an ultimatum from God. The purpose of the writing in London and the writing in Fatima was to identify me to them as the genuine messenger. Now that message, as I said, was an ultimatum, and in that message, British intelligence and the other interested parties who heard it, who I know included the Vatican and the American CIA, were told that if they don't change the way they're governing the world, which is actually a very corrupt way, that their power would be taken from them. But they were not only told that their power would be taken from them, they were also told that the means by which it would be taken would be global catastrophe. At the time of the writing of the letter of the law, synchronicity happened to me that let me know that the town of Oban in Scotland may have to be used as a demonstration of the kind of catastrophe that will occur in this world if the corruption of our leaders is not stopped. Now, that kind of catastrophe involves an asteroid strike. Later, when the Kelly family left India, we had to stay out of Britain for obvious reasons, and we ended up spending 7 years, or nearly 7 years, in Australia. During that time, I visited the town of Bowen in Queensland and made a similar discovery. Quite a long time before I knew about the existence of the Anna Code, we had been warning people that Oban and Bowen may be used as the final signal for mankind to let us know that the catastrophe is coming. Now, if that signal does occur, and the governments and the people who are hiding the events of 1996 don't at that point tell the world the truth, the bigger catastrophe will occur. And that catastrophe will also be caused by asteroid strikes, but ones of a much bigger nature. It will also involve the eruption of 2 supervolcanoes, so it will be a very, very total catastrophe. Now, since 1996, the British government, the American government, NASA, the ESA, the European Space Agency, and most of the world's astronomers have been encouraged to search the sky for asteroids and to try to devise methods of deflecting them to avoid damage to this planet. That was the way that our intelligence organizations responded to God's warning. They did it that way because they are totally insane. Now, they were advised to tell the world the truth about it all, and the truth about all of the other things that they've lied about in order to maintain their corrupt rule. That rule has lasted for centuries, and they have been keeping very big secrets from the people in order to keep it going for a very long time. One of those secrets is the thing that has provided me with my proof about all this. During the ultimatum, I had to tell them that they were being given 3.5 years to start implementing the policies that I had to tell them about. Now, those policies were just basic, obvious things that would be the right thing to do to make this world into a better place. Things like getting rid of all the nuclear weapons, dismantling the barriers between people, like the country boundaries, the borders, giving all the people in the world an equal deal by sharing out the world's resources in a way that was not governed by a profit motive. They were also told to use clean technologies and repair the damage that has already been done to the natural environment. Above all, they were told to tell the world the truth and thereby change the thinking of the people of the world so that understanding could be given to them. They have done none of it. Instead of complying with the ultimatum, they hid it, and they have actually murdered a number of people in high places in order to keep it hidden. 3 of those people are Diana Spencer, Mother Teresa, and Jill Dando. Now, when eventually we left Britain shortly after the ultimatum had been given and after attempts on our own lives had been made, we came to India, and from India I wrote to all 3 ladies. I told them all about the writing on the wall and what had been hidden, and I told them that I had written to each one of them, so each of the 3 women knew the other 2 women had been contacted. I know for certain that the reason why they all died was because they received my letters and because the wrong people found out that they knew about the writing on the wall. The tool that I have been given to prove my case also proves that. The next part of this introduction to my books explains what that tool is, how I came by it, and it shows some of the proof that is included in the books that proves the whole of my story. The code that I was led to 3.5 years after the ultimatum is the thing that Dan Brown hints at in his book The Da Vinci Code. Leonardo da Vinci at one time had been one of the people who had been led to the discovery of that code in a way that was designed by God for him to do so. In the year 2000, I was led to the rediscovery of that code by a route that God had planned to enable me to do so, because they did not use the 3.5 years that they had been given to start implementing the positive policies in order to save this world. So, in the year 2000, I was given the start of the thing that led me to my proof. And it is that proof that I'm going to demonstrate to you now. The proof exists in the form of a code that has several names, one of which is the Anna code, because Anna created it, another is Sion, another is the rose, another is the rock, because Sion is the biblical rock, and another is the 7th seal code. The demonstration that follows is a short demonstration that should enable you to see most of the aspects of the code, from which you'll get a good idea about the incredible plan that was pre-coded into the key that I got led to. I hope you enjoy the demonstration. Brilliant, man. Three and a half years after the ultimatum had been delivered, and no positive response had been given or shown by the governments and institutions who knew about it, their time was up. They had been given 3.5 years free time in which to start implementing the policies that had been suggested to them in the ultimatum, and they didn't do it. At that point, Anna provided me with, or started to provide me with, the proof that I needed to be able to show the world that they have hidden the ultimatum. The way it happened was like this. We were in Australia, in a place called Cobram in Victoria, when a friend lent me a book that was all about symbols. It was an old book, a book called The Lost Language of Symbolism by a man named Harold Bailey. Now, in the chapter about the meaning of the symbol bell, I found a curious thing. And my mother's maiden name is Blease, spelt like this. And Blease is not a very common name, and so when I found in the chapter about bell that there was a statement that told me that Blease has the meaning bell, I thought that there must be some reason why I had to come upon that very strange piece of information. But it wasn't until 2 months later that a sequence of synchronicities started happening that eventually led me to the reason why I had to know that the meaning of my mother's name, Blease, is bell. By that time, the Kelly family, along with the Dixon family, were working in an apple orchard in Orange, in New South Wales. And one day, on a Friday, at lunchtime, we had gone outside the orchard to have our lunch. While we were sitting on the grass eating our sandwiches, 2 dogs came running towards us, and I noticed that the dog in front, which was a Dalmatian, was wearing a name tag on its collar. Now the dog ran up to Elaine and stood in front of her, and I asked Elaine to have a look at the name tag and tell me what it said. Now the name on the dog's tag was Bella. I knew at the time that there was a reason why I had to ask Elaine to look at the dog's name tag, but I couldn't figure for the life of me why I had to know that the dog's name was Bella. Now the next thing that started happening is that the dogs ran away and it started to rain. Now that meant that we got the afternoon off from apple picking, because you can't pick apples when they're wet because they mark, the skins mark. So we got the afternoon off despite the fact that the rain then stopped. Taking advantage of the free day, we decided to take our children for a run up a mountain about 10 kilometres away from the orchard, named Mount Cannablis. So having done that, on our way home, we stopped at a cafe at a road junction at the base of the mountain. Now in that cafe, the woman who served us, having no other customers to attend to, came out to chat with us. And she was carrying in her arms a little puppy dog. So when she came up to our table, she put the dog down on the ground and engaged us in conversation. 5 minutes later, a customer arrived and the woman had to leave us and go and attend to her job. But she forgot to pick up the little dog. She walked away from our table and then realised that she needed the dog, so she turned round and called to it. And the name that she called, surprisingly, was Bella. When that happened, Elaine just looked at me, and because we both knew that something strange was happening. We knew that it was not by chance that we had come upon 2 dogs named Bella on the same day, 10 kilometres apart, after having never, ever known a dog called Bella in our entire lives before. So it was a little clue that made me think. Now that night, back at the orchard, lying in my sleeping bag in my tent, I thought about it and thought, what the heck is this about? Why Bella? Bella? And I realised that I hadn't actually seen the name tag, so I didn't know exactly how the Bella on the dog's name tag was spelt. I realised it could have 2 L's or a single L, but that it probably had 2. Elaine was sleeping, so I didn't want to disturb her and ask her. So I was mulling it over in my mind in my sleeping bag, and I realised that Bella is an anagram of a bell. A bell. Now, still at this point I didn't see the significance of that. Then I thought about the Bella with the single letter L and realised that it was an anagram of either the word Able, A-B-L-E, or the name Abel, A-B-E-L. But again, having no connection that led me to any conclusion, I decided to drop it and I went off to sleep. Now the next day was a Saturday, and I had already arranged to go to Orange to a Xerox shop to make a photocopy of a document that I intended to send to a well-known man in Australia. In that Xerox shop, I found myself standing next to a poster on the wall that had one word on it in big print, and that word was the word Abel, spelled A-B-E-L. Now, because that was the last thing that I'd thought about the night before, I realised that I was being given a continued prompt that was linking me somehow, or for some reason, to something to do with either a bell or Abel or something of that nature. So I then looked around to see if there were any other clues in the Xerox shop, and found that there were. There was actually one very big one. On a table next to me, well, about 6 feet away from me, there were a stack of magazines. And the top magazine was the 25th anniversary edition of Bell magazine. And because the number 7 had played such a significant role in the synchronicity that had taught us about synchronicity in the beginning in 1996, and because 25 adds up to 7, I realised that some very significant synchronicity was occurring, and that it was linked to the subject bell. Shortly after being in the Xerox shop, we had to leave the orchard in Orange and head to Agnes Water in Queensland, a place to which we had been invited by a good friend named Rob, who was a professional fruit picker that we had met in Orange the year before. So we set off on our journey to Rob's house in Agnes Water, which was a long way away, but we found that during that journey the bell synchronicity happened time after time after time. Every time we stopped the car, something happened involving a connection to a bell, or simply the word bell was very prominent at the place where we stopped. When we arrived at Rob's place, we moved into the caravan in his garden that he had said to move into, and the clock on the wall was a bell clock. It just had the single word bell written on it in big letters. A couple of days later, Rob and his son Daniel arrived in Agnes Water and moved into the house. So we went inside into Rob's kitchen to tell him about the bell synchronicity that was happening, and to explain that we didn't yet understand the full reason why it was occurring. While we were sitting at Rob's kitchen table, Rob's son Daniel informed us that they had an old bell upstairs that had been in the family for several generations and had been left to Rob by his grandmother when she died. So he volunteered to go up there and get it in case it had any connection to the reason for the bell synchronicity. Now the bell that Daniel brought down was an antique, and it turned out to be a thing called an Agnes bell. It's a ceremonial bell that was used in the Catholic Church to proclaim the arrival of the Lamb of God. Now on the bell there were several embossed motifs. The bell was made of brass or bronze, and one of the motifs was a picture of a lamb, and above the lamb was the word Agnes in Latin, with the V as the letter U, as Latin spelt things. So this was a big clue for me, because I realised that we were sitting in Agnes Water, and on looking up the meaning of the word Agnes in a dictionary, we discovered that it means lamb. So I knew that there was something very significant about the fact that we were in Agnes Water at the time that we saw the Agnes clue on the bell during the chain of bell synchronicity. Now the next clue came when I turned around and noticed that Rob's telephone number was an anagram of our old telephone number, our local telephone number in Scotland. I noticed that telephones were connected to the bell synchronicity for the obvious reason that they had bells on them, and that they were invented by a man named Alexander Graham Bell. Another little fact that came to my attention at that time is that the mayor of Agnes Water was named John Bell. That number was a 3-figure number, and the numbers were 523. Now in Tainault, near Oban, where we lived, our local number had been 235. So I thought it rather curious that I should have come upon that, and I wondered if there was anything meaningful about it. Now the next day, I went to the end of Rob's garden to check the mailbox, and on a post was the lot number of Rob's property, which I noticed was 352, same three numbers. So that made me very curious. I knew that there must be something about those three numbers that I needed to investigate. So I went back into Rob's house, and I found some paper and pen, and I wrote out the single-digit numerological alphabet, because the digits in those numbers were not double digits. It was all about single digits. When I did that, I made the startling discovery that the three numbers that had been brought to my attention actually spelled the word bell phonetically in the numerological alphabet, because the letter B is number 2, the letter E is number 5, and the letter L is number 3. So the very three letters that I had been, or numbers that I had been led to observe, spell that. Now, the next thing I did, because it was anagrams of the numbers that had happened before I had looked at this, I started looking at anagrams of the letters. Now, they're very simple, 3 letters. But the first thing I noticed was that when I did this and moved the 3 letters to BLE, I was looking at the first 3 letters of my mother's maiden name, Please. And then it clicked. I realized that the whole chain of synchronicity had occurred to make me look at my mother's name in numerological anagram form. When I did it, straight away I found this. Which I realized was telling me that I had been led to a sealed code. Now, when I looked at these 2 letters, I noticed that this one is the number 2 and this one is number 5. Together they add up to the number 7. So I realized then that my mother's maiden name is a little code that says 7 seal, and I already knew that the breaking of the 7th seal is prophesied in the book of Revelation in the Bible. Now the next thing that I found when I looked at it is that Please says sea bell. Now the significance of that, in my mind at least, was related to my prediction of the happening of the Oban rock as a warning bell for mankind, because I knew that that rock, or felt that that rock, will arrive in the sea at Oban. But then I noticed that the letters in the word sea also add up to 7. So believe is a code that says 7 seal and 7 bell. I then compiled all of the different little anagrams of believe. The ones that I could see were non-randomly formed. All things that had meaning that I could understand. And there weren't very many of them. When I'd finished it, I'd written them down, and then I realized that my aunt's name was connected to this, because my aunt's name is Isabel Please. And because Please means bell, Please Isabel, it made sense for me to look at Isabel as the next little clue. When I did, I found something that amazed me. Because Isabel says 11 bell, because this is 9, 1 and 1, and it also says 11 seal, because here we have the numbers 2 and 9, which add up to 11, and the word seal. Now the numbers 7 and 11, as I have previously stated, were the 2 numbers that had started the whole chain of synchronicity 4 years earlier, that had led us to to the discovery of this code. When I continued looking at it, I found that Isabel Blease says Blease bi-seal, and I understood that it was telling me that it was a two-part seal, because bi means two. So, and then, later, I discovered this. Doesn't really matter which way you look at it, which way round, Bible Seal 7 or Bible 7 Seal, and I knew that I'd found confirmation of the fact that I was looking at the actual biblical 7th seal, which was my clue to know that a pre-coded anagram code created by God really exists. After tabulating the anagrams of the word Blease, I then tabulated Isabel, and when the two code sequences were complete, I labelled the seals with an A for Blease, because it was the first seal that I found, and a B for Isabel. When I did that, I didn't realise that there was actually a very important reason for doing so. It happened before I discovered this. Later, when I looked at the anagrams of the words, the whole name Isabel Blease, I found that it says this. It says, see label bias. And when I saw that, I realised that I was being shown that there was a reason why Blease had been labelled A and Isabel had been labelled B, because normally Isabel comes before Blease. But I didn't know why. The next thing that I found was that it actually identified the labelling that I'd already given to the seals, like this. It says, C label is A, B. So I realised at this point that the whole name Isabel Blease contained instructions that were related to the two seals, the Blease bi-seal. Now, when 9/11 happened, that's when I discovered that Isabel is the code that links to that event. When I looked at Isabel, I noticed also that the first three letters are 911, and it leaves the word bell. A bell has always been associated with the warning bell for mankind. Because telephone numbers had helped me to discover the Blease seal, I realised I was looking at the American emergency telephone number here, 911. And next to it, when I wrote this anagram out, 911 bell, I wrote a little note saying something to do with an American emergency. I didn't know what it meant, but that's what happened in June 2000. Now when 9/11 happened, I remembered that, and I looked back at the Blease seals, and when I did, I made a further discovery. 9/11 and Bell also say this. The numbers in Bell are 2, 5 and 3, and the numbers in the letters WTC, the initials of the World Trade Center, are 5, 2 and 3. So Isabel is actually a little code that says 9/11 World Trade Center. And when the Bali bombing happened, because they were calling it Australia's 9/11, I looked back at the seals to see if they related to the Bali incident. And the first thing that I noticed was that in the Blease seal, you don't have the word Bali. But in the Isabel seal, you do. Now remember, the Isabel seal is the B seal. Now this is how the code proves that God intended to isolate both events, 9/11 and the Bali bombings, in the same seal, the Isabel seal. B seal, seed barley. So the two major negative events that have occurred in this world that have actually turned the world, changed the world, as George Bush puts it, are both coded in the biblical seventh seal and were pre-coded in my aunt's name long before it happened. It was not until those two events occurred that we actually found the connections to them in the Isabel seal. And by that time, I had almost completed the master key of the code, the key that I've been given to be able to prove everything to people by. And what I intend to do now is to explain how I got led to that key. At first, when we discovered the blue seals, we thought that we had found the entire thing. We thought that we'd found our proof, and we didn't realise that we were going to be led on to a greater code. But the next day, in June 2000, something happened that gave us a clue about where to start looking to find codes that contain greater information. At about 6 or 7 o'clock on the 28th of June, my son Ben came into Rob's house and told us all to go outside to see an amazing thing. Now, when we went out into the garden, what we saw was a ring of clouds that completely surrounded Agnes Water, and around the edges of the rim there was lightning happening, but it was very soft and very beautiful. It was flashing in different colours with no thunder. And as I looked at it, the words St. Elmo's fire came to my mind. I didn't think much of it at the time. I didn't realise that I'd been given a clue. But the next morning when I woke up, the words that were on my mind were the words St. Elmo's fire, and I realised that I had to look at the anagrams of those words. When I did, I found this. St. Elmo's fire is an old saying, and it relates to an electrical phenomenon that sailors used to see around the mastheads of sailing ships, an electromagnetic light effect that has borne that name for many, many years. We're looking here at a well-established set of letters. Now, when I looked at St. Elmo's fire, I found Scion master file, and I realised that Anna was telling me that the code I was being led to discover is literally the master file of Scion, the information needed to turn this world around into the paradise world that it really should be. In order to do that, we have to rid the world of corruption, and that means changing the leadership. The next thing that I found in St. Elmo's fire is this little anagram here that gave me a clue about the thing that I was being led to discover. We were soon to discover that the name Rose is one of the names that Anna gives to the code. And later we found out that it's the name that Leonardo da Vinci knew the code by. The Rose Code has been known to exist for a long time before I was led to it. Having seen this, we began to realise that there were code clues already coded into preset sayings and phrases, things that have been in common usage for a long time. So we started investigating some of the more well-known ones. Now, 6 months later, after spending a long time investigating small keys that sometimes were the names of people that we knew, we had by that time learnt a great deal about the way the code symbols are used and about the meanings of the symbols, the single symbols in the code. For example, the letter T is the symbol for balance, and the letter O is actually the symbol for the code itself. Now the reason why Anna uses O as the symbol for her code is that O, if you look it up in a dictionary, is a cipher, because it is both a letter and a number. Now a cipher is a code, and so O symbolises code. We also discovered that a blank space can represent O in Anna's code, because a blank space is 0 and 0 is O. So the code works by logic. It's as simple as that. 6 months after the discovery of the St. Elmo's fire key, I was investigating the old saying, "There's no peace for the wicked," and our friend Shirley Coviella, who had been with us from the very beginning of all of this in 1996, was prompted to look at the saying, "Blood is thicker than water." She had seen it in a newspaper article about George Bush, actually. When she did, she became very excited about what she found, and she brought the key to us. We were back in Cobram in Victoria at this time, living in an old shed. When Shirley brought the Blood is thicker than water key over, Elaine started to look at it. The discovery that Elaine made excited all of us, because what she found was that the key related precisely to the events that were happening to us at the time of the discovery of the key by Shirley. Now, Shirley's surname is Coviella, and as a child, everybody called her Kobe, spelled K-O-B-I. It's her nickname. Now, she's from Scotland. During the research on the code in the 6 months since we had left Agneswater, we had discovered that the word water is a code word that represents the information in the code, because the information is a fluid thing. By moving the letters around like water molecules move, the new information comes to light. And because it was in Agneswater that we found the code, we realised that the code is the Lamb's water. Now the vessel that holds the Lamb's water is the Holy Grail, and that is part of what you're looking at now. The code itself is the Holy Grail, because by the use of the code, the whole of creation was brought into being. The code existed before time began in the mind of God, and it is the formula by which creation was worked out. After Shirley brought the key over, Elaine was the first to look at it. I carried on looking at the key that I'd been looking at prior to then. And this is a thing that Elaine found in the key that immediately excited all of us. The key itself indicates that it was already coded, that the person who would look at it first would be Shirley Coviella. And when we saw that, we knew that we had found a very personal key that was linked to us and to the things that were happening at the time of the finding of the key. We knew that we had discovered something that was very important. Rob, our friend in Agneswater, had been a long-term Christadelphian. He had been taught to interpret the biblical scripture in a very strict and formal way, and had left no room for any other interpretation of the scriptures. So he didn't like to think that God was feminine, because he had been taught the opposite, that God is masculine. And it was a big problem for Rob. Now, when I looked at Blood is Thicker Than Water, I found this line in it that is an instruction from Anna to Rob to help Rob understand who the maker of the code actually is. It uses simple phonetics at the beginning. This is what it says. It's a basic instruction from Anna to me to show Rob that Anna is the creator of the code. Now, I found that in the Blood is Thicker Than Water key the night before Rob arrived in Cobram. But on that night, something happened that was to lead us to a discovery about the code and about the rule that the letter H exchanges with the letter P, here shown on these keys. Now, the way in which that happened is that when I came to look at Blood is Thicker Than Water, I found that I only had one letter H in the letter set that I had, and I had to pick up another letter and put a letter H on the back of it. Now, the letter that I picked up was the letter P. Later, on the night that I had found this line, Shirley put my code back on the table without realizing that she had turned over the letter H and leaving the letter P. Now, I carried on working on the code without noticing this. I had tabulated a lot of anagram lines in the next couple of hours before I actually cottoned on to the fact that I wasn't working with Blood is Thicker Than Water anymore, and at first I thought I had made an error. Knowing as I do that in actual fact everything is planned, I then began to wonder why I had been shown this apparent accident. Now, the next day when Rob arrived, I showed him the links to Shirley in the code, and I showed him the line "Tell Rob Anna with price code," and he wasn't that impressed by it because he did not want to accept that God is female. Then I stopped using the code and I turned the key, the H letter, back over to the letter P because I was still working on the code key with the letter P in place of the letter H. And then we talked to Rob about his trip down to Cobram. Now, Rob told us that on the way he kept picking up synchronicity all connected to the word Titan in a similar way to the way that we had picked up the bell synchronicity on the way to Agneswater. And Rob said, "Why do you think that happened? What does that mean?" So I said, "Well, why don't we look at the code, Rob, and see if it contains the answer?" Now, when I looked at it, we got a big surprise. Rob was a fruit picker. He was a professional fruit picker, and he was the same age as me. He was actually 2 days older than me, and it was a standing joke that I called him old. When we saw that answered Rob's question. The reason why Rob had been shown Titan all the way down to Cobram was so that he could be shown this when he got there. From that moment on, Rob started to take the code very seriously. In verification of the fact that the thing that we had been calling the PH accident was not an accident, Anna's humour says this: PH accident lit Rob's code water. Lit in this context means brought to light. If it hadn't been for the timing of the PH accident, the line "Rob the old picker saw Titan" would not have been there for Rob to see. Timing is everything. It turned out that Blood is Thicker Than Water was the basis of the master key that we were to spend the next 2 years finding. The way in which the code developed from Blood is Thicker Than Water to the final key was by the code itself showing us when a letter was required, a new letter. Now, the way in which that happened would be that if we looked at a particular subject, sometimes what would happen is that incomplete anagrams would occur that all lacked the same letter, but the precision of those anagrams was obviously there by design. So the missing letter, if a sequence of that nature occurred, the missing letter was then added to the key. Now, that happened a number of times until we reached a key that contained 34 letters. Now, during the working of that key over that 2-year period, we had discovered that the name that the key gives to itself is the iron rod key. And after the last 2 letters that were added to it completed the key, I made a discovery that verified that it was Anna's intention that the key should be completed by the addition of those 2 final letters. The last 2 letters that were added to the final key were these ones, S and N. What I'm going to show you now is the thing that shows the planning behind it that's already coded into the completed key. The fact that that anagram isolates the very 2 letters that were the letters that had already completed the key showed us, it confirmed the fact that the key was now complete. Here's something else that I found later in the completed key. It should also be remembered that this key did not derive from extending the Blees field. It came from the extensions of blood is thicker than water. And yet, this is what it says. Blees, I in the code is Anna because it's the first person, and Anna is the creator of the key. Here it says, Blees, I synchronize the link to that word. It's Anna's way of showing that she intended me to find the code by first leading me through synchronicity to the word Blees. I have a copy of my birth certificate that actually verifies the fact that my mother's maiden name is Blees. On the birth certificate, you'll see that I was born on the 17th of September 1952. On the little card that I'm going to show you are anagrams of the iron rod key that show that my birth date was pre-coded into the key. A full explanation of the way the letters of the alphabet relate to numbers will be shown a little bit later on when I show you some more interesting numbers. The iron rod key says, code noted man Ross Kelly's 17th of the 9th, 1952 birth. It also says 17th of the 9th, 1952, noted codeman Ross Kelly's birth. Now this shows Anna's intention in giving me the code. He also says this, code ID tip, that's code identity tip, names Ross Kelly, born 17th of the 9th, 1952. The iron rod key was completed in August 2002. In June 2006, in Varkala, I met an Italian girl named Daniela who referred to the code as an oracle. Before the completion of the code, I had checked the incomplete key to look at the oracle links, but prior to Daniela's prompt, I hadn't thought to look at them in the completed key. The day after Daniela mentioned the oracle, I was prompted again when Elaine opened a newspaper and I found myself looking at an advert for the company Oracle. So I knew that I had to take a look. The following day, these are the lines that I found. The first 8 or 9 anagrams all contain the same words in a different order. And the key is pre-designed to use those words to describe all the different aspects of the code. It's a very, very clever link indeed. The bottom line clearly shows that the oracle is this code. When the letter O from the word Rosh is used to complete the word code, the letters RSS leaves the numbers 911. Later, I'll show you why the code links to 911. Now I'm going to show you a few reasons why the governments and powerful institutions don't want you to know about it. The reason why the code uses the term old in connection with this is that the key that Rudolf Hess took to Britain was in use before this key was brought to light. Now, the reason why there's a blank 0 in the word code here is because when you fill it in, it leaves the initials LD, and they relate to the fact that the code that Adolf Hitler had was first discovered by Leonardo da Vinci. Hess flew to Britain. He demanded to speak to Lord Hamilton. He wouldn't speak to anybody else. Now the reason why is because Hess found instructions in the code to deliver the code to Lord Hamilton in Britain. Now here the code shows the plan. Code to Hess, Britain. Hamilton and Kelly. Phonetic spelling is commonly used in Anna's code, but okay. There's not really any need to spelling it good, just getting something out of here. Anna's code relates to numbers by the single-digit numerological alphabet. It's very simple logic that existed a long time before I knew about the existence of Anna's code. It simply starts with A as 1, takes you up to number 9, and then starts at 1 again. So that it goes 1 to 9, 1 to 9, 1 to 8. So every letter of the alphabet is represented by a single-digit number. And the code uses numbers to great effect. Okay. The Anna code reveals the fact that the British MOD have been hiding Da Vinci's key since Rudolf Hess took it to them in 1941. Of course, this is an example of one of the reasons why they're hiding the code. It's because it exposes all of their secrets. Note carefully, Leonardo da Vinci kept this, my lost rose. Leonardo da Vinci was the Grand Master of the Prieuré de Sion, the keepers of the secret of the code. The Prieuré de Sion hid da Vinci's keys on tombstones scattered all around Europe, disguised as tombstone inscriptions. One of these keys was later discovered by Saunier, the Catholic priest in the French village of Rennes-le-Château, and later rediscovered by Adolf Hitler. Winston Churchill was the British Prime Minister at the time of the Rudolf Hess Da Vinci Code deception. The next thing that I'm going to show you is a secret that most people realise already exists. The letters NY stand for New York, and by the numerological alphabet, the letters I, S and S are 911, which is 9/11. When I first found this code link, I didn't know the meaning of the word that I was left with here, and had to look it up in a dictionary. The word rook in English means deception. Now, the configuration of the numbers in this line by the letters ISS also serve another purpose by identifying which other intelligence agency was involved in that deception. This is the name that British intelligence call themselves by. The CIA, British MOD and British intelligence are not the only people who have known about the existence of the code for a long time. This line gives away another culprit. The ANA code uses inverted symbols that show other letters, and because it's also Latin-based, the symbol V represents the letter U, and the ANA code is designed to use that fact. The next thing that I'm going to show you is the fact that the code relates to reality with great precision, and the use of numbers is one of the ways in which it does it. Now, this document here is an original document given to me by the Australian Department of Immigration. Here, the initials that they use in their logo are clearly shown, D-I-M-I-A. Now, I was given this document several months after the iron rod key had been completed, and on it, it shows the number that they call my client ID number, and that number contains 11 numbers. Now, the code provided proof for DMIA by use of their own client ID number that they allocated to the Kelly family. After putting down the words Ross Kelly's client ID number, the code key leaves 11 letters. Now, those 11 letters correspond precisely to the 11-digit number that DMIA gave to us. They are 1, 1, 2, 5, 9, 0, 0, 8, 8, 4, and 9. The code then goes on to clarify the issue by pointing out the people who gave us the client ID number, and the way it does it is by using my son Ben's name. Ben was also covered by this DMIA client ID number. In the alphabet, the letter R is the number 9, and so is the letter I. So if I do this, we still have the same DMIA client ID number, but by doing so, we also have this. Now that shows that my son's name had to be Ben in order to identify whose clients the Kelly family were. From this little demonstration, a discerning mind should be able to comprehend that what it means is that that number was a predetermined fact. It was something that was coded in the code before we were given it. The next thing I'm going to show you is that that did not happen as a fluke, that there are other documented proofs that relate to identification numbers that prove that all identification numbers are predetermined by a single intelligence. When we arrived back in Britain after being deported by the Australian authorities, I had to open a post office account to have my benefit money paid into because I had no work to go back to. This is the original document that the British Post Office sent me to tell me what my PIN number for the card they had given me is. I had to peel off a sticker here to reveal the number, which you can see is 0010. Now we'll see how the code relates to that identification number. Here we have our Kelly's PIN numbers in this code data, and what we are left with is the PIN number. I'm going to show you that the code isn't just designed to relate to my ID numbers, it contains proofs for everybody, and the example that I'm going to show you is one that was taken from Arundhati Roy's book, The God of Small Things. This is a blown-up photocopy of a page that shows the ISBN number of Arundhati Roy's book. And this is how the code relates to that number. That's 8186939024, which is the same as the ISBN number. After spending 7 months in Demia's Villawood Detention Centre, we eventually realised that there was no way that they were going to allow us to win our case. We were claiming political asylum. They knew that we were telling them the truth, but they dare not allow us to win the case because the whole truth about it would have come out. So we allowed them then to deport us back to Britain. Now, not long after arriving back in Britain, I found in the code lines that identified the killers of Diana Spencer. I found the code that proves the real reason why she was murdered, that she was murdered, and by whom she was murdered. And when I found those lines, I also found code links that related to the death of David Kelly that proved the real reason for his death too. Now, during that code search, I came upon code links that directed me to send the information to the Metropolitan Police in London, but I didn't know who to send it to. So I took my problem to Elaine, my wife, and said I don't know who our link would be. And 5 minutes after doing so, she called me back to her and pointed out a letter that she had found in the Guardian newspaper that had been sent in by a lady named Commander Cressida Dick of the Metropolitan Police. She is a very high-ranking police officer in London. Now, when I checked her name in the code, I found that the code verified that she is the person that I was meant to send the Diana links to, so I compiled a letter for her. After doing so, I cut out the letter that Cressida Dick had sent to the Guardian newspaper, which I'll show you here. Here you can see her name. A little while after cutting out the newspaper cutting, I glanced at the back of it and noticed that I had isolated the words "a note" from what had previously been a headline of the article that was on the back of Cressida's letter. This made me examine the article, and what I found was that the whole article here is an article about the philosopher Plato. Now, because this had happened, I knew that there was something significant about it and that the clue would be in the code. Now, when I looked at the code key, this is what I found as Cressida Dick's own personal proof about the murder of Diana Spencer and David Kelly and a number of other people who had died by having knowledge of this thing. Here we go. Now, when I found this line, I did not know the meaning of these three letters. The word "rye" I knew was a word, but I didn't know what it meant, and I had to look it up in a dictionary. When I did, I found that "rye" means contorted. Contorted means something that's stretched out of shape or not its original shape. Now, the note that's found behind Cressida Dick's letter is a contorted note, and it links to Plato because it was originally the headline of the Plato article. This was God's proof for Cressida Dick. The actual reason for David Kelly's death had nothing to do with the fact that he disagreed with Tony Blair's assessment about Saddam Hussein's weapons capability. The real cause, the real reason why they had to kill that man, and they did, was because I met him 1 month before his death occurred. I met him on a bus in Barnes in London, and I handed him a copy of a note that had already been sent to Tony Blair and was addressed to Tony Blair. When I met him, I didn't know who he was. His name had not been disclosed in the media, but the Gilligan article was being talked about at that time. So the way it was arranged, God had it that I met a man thinking that he was probably an academic of some kind. I thought that he looked like a university lecturer or man of that nature, and I thought that he would be interested in seeing the anagram code. So before I got off the bus at Barnes Post Office, I handed it to him and told him to take it home and have a look at it, because I thought he would find it interesting. 2 weeks later, I walked into my living room and saw the man on the bus being questioned at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee hearing, and I realised that something really important had occurred. Shortly after that, we heard about the death of David Kelly, and when I looked in the code to see what the code said about it, this is part of the verification that I found. Anna uses the term psi to symbolize the mental link to her that is the connection in the code. It can be spelt either C-I, P-S-Y, or S-Y. Any phonetic spelling of psi means the same thing. Geoffrey Hoon was the British Secretary of Defence at the time of David Kelly's death. He was David Kelly's boss at the MOD. This address on the PIN number document shows that I lived in Castleknow Road in Barnes, and it was in Castleknow Road in Barnes that I handed David Kelly that note. At the time that I completed and sent the letter to Cressida Dick at the Metropolitan Police, I also sent a copy of her letter to the man who was in charge. He was the coroner in the David Kelly case. His name was Nicholas Gardner, and he was the Oxfordshire coroner. In my letter to him, I explained to him that I had sent the information regarding David Kelly's death to the police. Sometime later, I received this letter from Mr. Gardner, which I'll be showing you a little bit later on, because it turned out to be extremely important. H.M. Coroner. As I state, dear Mr. Kelly, re the late Dr. David Kelly, I thank you for your letter of the 18th of March. However, as I indicated at the hearing on 16th March, I have no further powers in this matter. If you have any information to offer, you appear to have done correctly in reporting it to the police. Yours sincerely, N.G. Gardner, H.M. Coroner for Oxfordshire. Okay. After sending the two letters to the police and David Kelly's coroner, synchronicity started happening to me that showed me that for some strange or unknown reason I had to also send a copy of the lines relating to the death to an actress in America named Julia Stiles. Now the problem was I had no way of knowing how to get to her. I didn't know where to send a letter if I was to compile one for her. But my problem was solved when on the 27th of March 2004 I came upon this advertisement in a Guardian Guide entertainment guide. As you'll see, it has a very apt headline: "Everybody should experience the shock of this play." The first thing I noticed when I saw this advert was Julia Stiles' face. Now, that excited me because she was the girl of the moment as far as I was concerned, and I very quickly discovered that the solution to my problem had arrived, because the advert informed me that Julia Stiles was about to come to work in a play in London, and that the play started on the 15th of April. Oleanna at the Garrick Theatre supplied my address to send the information to Julia Stiles. Now, I saw this advert, as you can see here, on March the 27th. It was a Saturday and it was late afternoon. That evening I spent a few hours considering what I would have to do to fill Julia Stiles in with enough information to understand what this was all about, and I realised it was going to take quite a sizable letter to do it. So the next day I spent the day compiling the letter for Julia Stiles. Now on the Monday, which was the 29th of March, I posted a parcel to Julia Stiles at the Garrick Theatre in London, and this is the actual postal receipt of that parcel. Here you can see it's dated the 29th of the 3rd, 29th of March. Now on that day, my wife Elaine went to the internet to check up on Julia Stiles to find out more about her, to see if we could find out why it should be that the information was being sent to her. One of the discoveries that Elaine made is that I had written a letter to Julia Stiles on Julia Stiles' birthday. Now that, I realised, was a very significant fact. So I looked in the code, and this is what I found. Okay. See Stiles on ad to link on March birthday, which is precisely what I had done. The picture of Julia Stiles was the thing that alerted me to her presence in that TV guide. Later, when I examined the code to find more connections to Julia Stiles and Oleanna, this is one of the code lines I found. The letter S is the number 1. The letter N is the number 5. So that says April 15th. And here we see limited season from 15th of April. Okay. Now, 2 days after sending the parcel to Julia Stiles, this one, which is dated the 29th of March 2004, I received a reply from Nicholas Gardner, Her Majesty's Coroner, H.M. Coroner, Nicholas Gardner. And I noticed that the date on his letter, the date he compiled the letter to me, was the same date as the date on Julia Stiles' postal receipt, the day that I sent the letter to Julia Stiles. This, I thought, was a significant thing. Here's Anna's proof that she arranged the timing of the letters. And why our Creator gave me that proof is to show that the lines that I had sent to the coroner were sent by design and therefore contained real proof, real evidence about the murder of David Kelly. In connection with the deaths of the three ladies that I mentioned prior to showing you the code, I have a few clues for you to see. Just before Diana Spencer's death, she sent a note to her trusted friend Paul Burrell, her butler. Now in that note, that was published in the Daily Mail newspaper maybe a year and a half ago, it just said, "What a secret, Paul. The tide is turning." Now in the letter that I sent to Diana, Teresa and Jill Dando, they were the words that I used in connection with the event of the writing on the wall and the effect that it would have on the British establishment. I knew that by that time Diana Spencer was not amused by those people. Now here I have code lines that verify that Paul Burrell's note was set up by God to provide me with proof of the Diana link. I'll start with this one. Diana's old news tip by the Creator's code link. The code says, "My code kit," that's Anna's code kit, pins Diana's hot note, and the name that it leaves is Burrell. This is another code link that shows God's intention for Diana's note to her butler, Paul Burrell. Diana's tied note to Burrell pins my shop, and so it should. The world should be shocked to know that Diana Spencer was killed to hide God from the people of the world.
Try it again.
These are not the only two lines that pinpoint the murderers of Diana Spencer. Here's another example. Now somebody really ought to do that. At Christmas time 2003, a long time after I knew that the names of the towns that may be used as asteroid strike demonstration places, which I had discovered prior to knowing that Anna's code existed, while we were examining code links to the Scottish Stuart clan, who have two ways of spelling their name, we made a major discovery that is known as the Stuart link pin. Now the Stuart clan spell their name this way, and they spell their name this way. But phonetically, the words both say Stuart. This, as in computer language, is God's symbol for the language of the code, because in a way, this is God's computer. And it says here, R. Kelly's IO, which means my code language, and Stuart phonetics identify Oban. And when we use the other phonetic Stuart, we find that the code identifies Bowen. The names of the very two towns that I had been telling everybody about in connection with two asteroid strikes a long time before we had the key that proves it. The key also says this. Asteroid. So not only does the code key identify the two towns by the Stuart LinkedIn, but it also identifies the reason. Asteroids. Before I get onto the subject of my own books, I'd like to show you something that should indicate to you who the real author of all the books is. This one is particularly relevant to this subject. During the 6 years that were spent working on the code, the lists that are demonstrated in Book 2, the code was used to great purpose. We pre-timed a number of near-miss asteroids that were set up by God to be used as warning, further warning, to the governments who had hidden the writing on the wall. After a succession of those kind of proofs were provided to further warn the governments, catastrophes here on Earth started to occur much more rapidly than ever before. The tsunami, the Pakistan earthquake, the Nias earthquakes that hit Indonesia, the hurricanes that hit America, and several volcanic eruptions were all pre-timed and proven to be timed by the code, and were used as further warning to try to get our errant readers to change their tack. If they don't change, a very big catastrophe is going to come. For most people, if that event arrives, it will be the end. But for some, there is a way to be saved at the time of the final catastrophe. The information that relates to the way in which people are going to be rescued at that time, which is actually a very astonishing way, is all to be found in the books. Little Book Big Secret Part 1 contains a full account of the things that happened in 1996 that were hidden, and Little Book Big Secret Part 2 contains the entire story of the code and a very big code demonstration. The two books are available either directly from me or from outlets positioned all along the cliff here in Varkala and also a few shops in Coverland. You cannot buy them anywhere else. Shirley Kobiela can be found in the cafes of Coverland demonstrating the code, and the books are also available from her. As I am now on this rooftop in India, you are surrounded by nutcases. The worst of them are the people who are ruling your lives by keeping secrets from you, and the code is only one of them. If their negative behaviour is not stopped, catastrophe is going to come. After Little Book Big Secret had been printed, I looked in the code to see how the code related to the books themselves. This is what I found. A red star has pinned my little book's icon. This shows that it was God's intention that the icon on the book should be the little red star. It also says it this way. If you look at the spine of the book, there is a little red star on it. This film was shot by Alexis Nole. In the second book, you'll see that he is the man whose 5 day link covered the cinema link.